Tonight's speaker, I'll tell you a little bit about him, although you probably know as much as I do. Tony Musso will be, he's our featured speaker, and will tell us about his new book, Hidden Treasures of the Hudson Valley, Volume 3. Now he also has 1 and 2 here with him, and tonight he's going to be available if you'd like to purchase 1, or even if you want all 3 of them. He'll be here, and I don't know if Margie's here, right? Margie Spratt is here. I called her yesterday to make sure she was coming because the Stoutenburg Cemetery is one of Margie's prized possessions, and Tony has the Stoutenburg Cemetery covered in one of his hidden treasures in his book 3, right, Tony? So with that, he's going to cover 55 significant properties in the Hudson Valley. So with that, I will turn this over to Tony Musso. Please help me welcome Tony.
Thank you. Just as a little correction, I'm not going to be doing 55 sites because they didn't want to serve breakfast in the morning. I was willing. They told me, well, that's a bit much, so I knocked it down to about 13 maybe, I think. Let me turn this on. Yeah, so this is volume 3 of the Hidden Treasures. You know, after I did volume 1, I thought that was it for Hidden Treasures of the Hudson Valley. And then I got so many requests that I did another 55 sites for volume 2. And then I went on to write a book about Statsburg, the village of Statsburg. And I thought I was done with the Hidden Treasures. But I did do a Hidden Treasures of the Catskills. And so I was running around doing those talks. And then more and more I started getting emails and everything. Are you doing volume 3? So I finally got to the point where I said, well, if people are requesting it, I might as well write it. I guess they're interested. And it is a very interesting, you know, it's interesting to me. I mean, most of you know that I do the Dateline column in the Poughkeepsie Journal. It's a labor of love. I mean, I've been doing it 12 years now. So when you think about it, I have 55 sites in each of these 3 volumes, so that's 165 hidden treasures. And then I've been doing 12 years, I've been doing the column at 52 columns a year times 12, so do the math. It's 600-700 hidden treasures, and I somehow keep finding them. I'll give you a little preview tomorrow if you get the Poughkeepsie Journal. I knew about this site a little over a year ago, Lawyers Row. It's in the city of Poughkeepsie. It was a row of buildings that 50 attorneys practiced out of. And it's actually on the site where the Dutchess County office building is today. It was torn down, Lawyers Row was. And the only reason I couldn't do it last year was I couldn't find an image. And then I finally found an image at the history room at the Adrian's Library, and I was thrilled. It was like being a kid on Christmas morning and open up the gift, and I found the picture. And I know Sharon Butler, your town historian, is here. She is unbelievably helpful to me with my column, as is Patsy and John Golden, and I have my key people in Hyde Park. In fact, I'm working on a column now on the Union Corners schoolhouse. That's yours. You gave me a quote. I hope it's yours. I have to get one more quote. But I went out to photograph it. It's over at the elementary school off of Route 9G, Violet Avenue. So that's the little schoolhouse. Yeah. Well, that's where I went, the North Park Elementary. Yeah. Okay, so getting back to volume 3 now, I spanned the entire Hudson Valley again for this one because people seem to enjoy doing day trips, as I do. And so I included sites from Westchester and Rockland County all the way up to, on the west side of the river, the highest site is in Saugerties, and on this side of the river, the highest site is in Hudson, New York. So all very drivable to take day trips, and there's some really nice sites in it. And so we're going to start in Westchester County, then we'll jump across the Tappan Zee Bridge. I'll get off my soapbox now. There's a reason it was called Tappan Zee. Anyway, historically, you have to keep it, you know. Anyway, then we're going to jump across the bridge, and we're going to come up that side and come across in Kingston and come down to this area. And I'm glad you're here tonight, because I learned how to say Jacobus Stoutenberg. In the beginning, I used to say, how did I pronounce it? Jacobus. Boy, did I get a lecture. Thanks for coming tonight. Okay, so we're going to start in Westchester County, and it's the site that's actually featured on the front cover of the book, and it's called Carramore. It's in Katona, New York. And let me tell you a little bit about the history. In 1938, a woman named Carolyn Hoyt had put her 100-acre property in Katona on the market. It was named Carramore after her, Caroline Carramore. At the same time that she did that, an international banker and attorney from New York City, his name is Walter Rosen and his wife was Lucy, they were looking for a weekend summer getaway place. And you know, yeah, that is a summer and getaway place. Well, anyway, they came up because Walter Rosen, one of his partners in his law office, happened to be Carolyn Hoyt's son. And he says, you know, my mother's selling this 100 acres. Why don't you come up and look at it? Well, they came up, they fell in love with it, and they bought it on the spot, signed a check, wrote a check. Now, this was not standing at the time. She had a little arts and crafts house because it was just a weekend property. Well, that was the only thing the Rosens didn't like. So they knocked down the arts and crafts house, and they built this beautiful Mediterranean revival villa. It's got a red tile roof. It's got a central courtyard and a gateway entrance. The gateway entrance is a little blocked by this tree here, but you could see part of the archway. This would be the front entrance to the house, and if you wanted to go in the house, the door was on the left-hand side of the archway. If you went straight into the middle, there is what they call the Spanish courtyard. You would come into a courtyard, and there were French doors. You could access every room on the first floor from the courtyard itself. Really, really well done. Now, both Walter and Lucy Rosen were art enthusiasts, so there's many, many famous painters represented in the house in very famous paintings. On the grounds, there are many, many sculptures, and they really did a lot of gardening. Carolyn Hoyt had originally put in a sunken garden. They expanded it, and now there's about 5 gardens on the property, different kinds of garden, butterfly gardens, sunken gardens, things of that nature. The largest space in the residence is the music room. This was their living room. This is where they entertained their guests. The room dimensions are 40 feet wide by 80 foot long. In other words, it's bigger than my house. And it's got a 30-foot high ceiling. It features French and Swiss stained glass windows, and it served as their entertainment place whenever their friends from New York City came up for a visit. Now, throughout the house, there are rooms that specifically reflect a single country in Europe. So when you go into these rooms, they are furnished. They have paintings related to a specific company, rugs, everything in the room. And those countries are Italy, France, Spain, and England. When the Rosens received word in 1944 that their son had died in battle overseas during the war, they decided right then that they were going to bequeath their entire estate, the 100 acres, the house, and everything, to use as a music and art center, because they were very into classical music and all of that. And that was going to be done as a tribute to their son. Well, Walter Rosen died in 1951, and Lucy Rosen died in 1968. In 1971, the Caramore Center for Music and Arts opened. While it's primarily known, anybody hear of Caramore? It's primarily known for its music festival in the summer. From May through about September, they have jazz festivals, classical music, opera. They even use some of the gardens, the sunken gardens. They'll put folding chairs in between all the hedges, and they have acoustic concerts in there. It's really well done. But what a lot of people don't know, they'll go to this music festival, is that you could tour the house. You know, there's a fee to go out and tour the house, but once you tour, they give you about an hour tour of the house, and then you could roam the grounds and go visit all the gardens. You're on the grounds for the day. They also do special events. And so if you had a couple of friends and you wanted to go out there for an afternoon tea, they serve tea and crumpets. You get a tour of the house, and so there's special events. So at the end of this chapter, as every other chapter that has one, I listed the website, the phone number, and I did that for every site in the book, so you can get in touch with these folks and maybe go out there and visit. It's open all year round. And I'm going to be taking a bus tour from Mount St. Mary's College down here in May. This is one of the stops we're going to make. So that is Caramore. Now, you know, one of the most popular things that we're known for in the Hudson Valley is the Hudson Valley School of Art. And the founder of that movement was Thomas Cole, the artist, and he lived in Catskill, New York. And the most famous artist that came out of that movement is Frederick Church, and he lived in Olana, just south of Hudson. Both those sites are in volume 2 of my book, but I'm going to show you another site in Westchester, a fellow that was just as well known as Frederick Church back in the day, but his name seems to have fallen off the charts lately, and not many people know him. His name is Jasper Cropsey. And we're going to visit his house in Hastings on Hudson. During the 19th century, Jasper Cropsey was one of the most renowned painters with the Hudson River School of Art. He began his career as an architectural apprentice in 1843 down in New York City. And later that year, he started dabbling in oil and watercolor landscapes. Well, he came to the attention of the National Academy of the Arts down in Manhattan, and he had an exhibition there in 1844. It was so well received, and he sold so many paintings that he gave up architecture, and he went into landscape painting full-time as his career. He got married in 1847, and with his wife, they traveled to Europe for 2 years. They visited Italy, France, Switzerland, and England, and they were studying different art styles. Upon returning home in 1849, he opened a studio and an art gallery in New York City, and that's where he sold all his work. In 1869, he became so wealthy from selling his paintings. I mean, you're talking the mid-1800s, and he was getting $5,000 and $6,000 a painting. A lot of money. Well, he leaned back on his architectural background. He designed a 29-room mansion and art studio in Warwick, New York, right across the river. He christened the home Aladdin. Well, everything was going well, but by the late 1880s, the Hudson River School of Art was falling out of fashion. You know, art fluctuates. You know, we go through the Andy Warhol era, the Norman Rockwell era, the Peter Max. It just shifts. Well, people weren't buying the Hudson River School of Art anymore by the 1880s, and he wisely said to his wife, we better downsize quickly, because he was getting pennies on a dollar for his paintings. Where he would get $1,000 for a painting, he was selling it for $50. So they sold Aladdin, they moved to Hastings on Hudson, and they rented a house for 1 year before they bought his house in 1885. And the house was 50 years old when he bought it. So the house was built in 1835. The only thing that he did to this house was he added on a beautiful, beautiful art studio. on the side of it. And he named it Everest. And he and his wife lived out their life there, and he basically did just local paintings, landscape paintings of the Hudson River once they moved there. Like I said, he enlarged the house to add the art studio, and from this front door right here, if you turn around and look straight out, you're looking right at the Hudson River. So it's just a beautiful, beautiful site up on a bluff, but it's on an actual, just a regular street with other houses. He just had more property than everybody else. Now, Cropsey died in the home in 1900 at 77 years old, and his wife Maria died 6 years later. Everest was left to his granddaughter Isabel. What had happened was they had 3 daughters. One of the daughters and her husband tragically died in a car accident while they were vacationing out in California. And so they raised their daughter, Isabel, grew up in this house. She got married out of the house, and she stayed living here. She actually married a man that became a multi-term mayor of Hastings-on-Hudson. So this house became the entertainment place of Hastings. Everybody knew this house for the balls they used to do and everything else. When they died during the 1970s, Isabella's daughter, the great-granddaughter of Cropsey, she founded the Newington Cropsey Foundation. Her married name was Newington. She lived in she still lives, she's 94 today. She lives in Westport, Connecticut. And starting in the 60s, her and her husband, who was very wealthy, were buying all of Cropsey's paintings up, her great-grandfather's paintings, for $50 and $75. They would go into galleries in New York City and say, do you have any paintings by Jasper Cropsey? And the owner would have to go into the basement. They didn't even have them on display. Well, they amassed about 200 of his paintings, and they had them all out at their home in Westport. Well, she wanted to make sure that this house was preserved after her mother passed away, and she also wanted to keep her great-grandfather's name relevant. So what she did was she founded this Newington Cropsey Foundation. They appointed a director, and now you can go down, tour the entire house. Throughout the house is all his watercolors. You go into the art studio, that's worth the drive alone, the art studio. And you could see all his oil work and everything else, and it's got a beautiful cupola up top, nice northern light, which artists always like. And then in 1994, Barbara Newington built the Gallery of Art on the back side of the property. Now, this is a very small hall. The only reason I chose this for the photo is I had good light coming in that window. But the gallery is very big. There are 225 oil paintings in that gallery. I've taken 4 bus trips down to this house and gallery. Everyone loved it. And I usually, if it's free admission, I try to, I give a donation. I'm bringing 55 people into the place. They will not accept the donation. You can't even give them a donation. Barbara Newington is adamant that she wants this to remain free. So if you want a really nice free outing, this would be a great place to go to. And it's just beautiful. If you like art especially, you'll really enjoy it. Okay, crossing across the bridge, we're going to come into the town of Chester. And this is the 1915 Chester Railroad Station. In 1834, the New York State Legislature was persuaded to authorize construction of the New York and Erie Railroad. The railroad originated in Piermont, New York, which is just south of the bridge, the Tappan Zee Bridge, and it goes up as far as Dunkirk on Lake Erie, so it's 400 miles. It was a very long line. As construction moved forward without issues, when they got to the village of Chester, they had to contend with what the locals called black dirt. You know what black dirt is? Marshland, and it's just very hard. So what they had to do was they had to put 50-foot pilings down into the marsh just to support the tracks and the train and everything, and they got it through there. Now in 1841, the first station to be built on the line was in Chester, And Chester and Goshen became the first stations on the line to have full-time ticket agents. The first passenger train arrived in Chester later that year, and the most prominent passenger on that first train was Secretary of State Daniel Webster, and there he is right there. And he created a little bit of controversy because he refused to sit in a passenger car. Instead, he chose to sit on a rocking chair, you could see him with the blanket over his legs, on a flatbed car. Now, he claimed that he wanted to do that to better enjoy the surroundings, but his critics said it was just a political stunt to be better noticed. But when you think about it, it was right after this that all the politicians started campaigning off the back of the train cars. So he may have been onto something, Daniel Webster. The dairy industry was the driving factor of the railroad's early success, and in 1842, the first shipment of 240 quarts of milk left Chester, destined for New York City. By 1900, about 7,000 quarts of milk were shipped to New York City every year just from Orange County alone. In 1915, this larger station was built as it was being used more and more in Chester, and the 1841 station just became a freight depot. They just used that for freight shipments. But by the 1980s, 1780s, with highways becoming prevalent, the New York State Thruway and roads were getting and everybody had their own cars, railroads across the board were suffering. There weren't many people using railroads now because they had their own vehicles to get around. And so what happened here was that the last train that passed through Chester was in the 1980s, the mid-1980s, and then it basically closed down. Now, the Chester Historical Society was founded in 1964, and in 1984 they were able to acquire this building. They meticulously restored the inside and outside, and in it there is a museum to the Erie Railroad, the New York and Erie Railroad, and there's also a local history section in there. And this is open every weekend. Most of the sites, the hidden treasures, are open May through October. So this would be open on Saturdays and Sundays, May through October. Again, their website is at the end of the chapter with the phone number. This is another free site. So if you're a railroad buff, and you know, we have the beautiful Hyde Park Railroad here, and they have all the model trains inside, this might be interesting to you to go over and pay this a visit. Now, the next site I've taken about 3 busloads of people to, and this is just outside of Goshen, New York, and it's called the Hillhold Farmstead. If you're familiar with that side of the river, you might be familiar with the Thomas Bull Memorial Park. It's a very, very big park over there. They have a botanical gardens and everything. That's right across the road from this. This house was built in 1769, and it was named Hillhold. It was the home of prosperous Orange County farmer Thomas Bull. He was the 4th of 12 children born to William and Sarah Bull, who owned 100 acres and a stone house nearby. Now, that's another chapter in the book. And you can go visit the William and Sarah Bull house free of charge. It's very near to this one. So what I like to do is I like to cluster sites so that if you drive 40 minutes to see a site, you can see 2 or 3 at the same day and make a whole day trip out of it. In 1724, William Bull, the father, who was very loyal to the crown, he petitioned King George I for some extra land. Well, in return, King George gave him 500 acres. When he died in 1755, the land was equally divided between Thomas and his brother William. Now, if you're thinking, wait a minute, you just said he was one of 12 children. Well, the other children were all women, and they did not put deeds into, ladies, don't shoot the messenger. Only men could get the land in those days, and so William and Thomas split the land, 250 acres each. Now, in between planting crops on the ground, Thomas Bull planned to build his stately house to reflect the family's wealth and status in the community. Paneling for this house was shipped in from England, and the interior was also fitted with mahogany balls on the newels on the center hall staircase, and it had mahogany balusters. It boasts wide plank floors and several fireplaces, and the exterior is built of native limestone. Following the lead of his parents, William Bull, Thomas Bull rather, and his wife had and raised 12 children in this house. I have 2. I don't know how they raised 12 in this house. Now it gets real interesting, because Thomas was just like his father. He was loyal to the crown. When the American Revolution started, he was imprisoned 7 times because he refused to sign the Articles of Association pledging loyalty to this country. He was a loyalist. What I found interesting when I was researching this is, as passionate as he was a loyalist, his wife was a patriot. So they must have had unbelievable conversations over the dining room table at dinner. And as a side note, this is another book. I don't know how they ended up with 12 children, but that's another story. During the 19th century, the house became known as the Bull-Jackson House because Civil War Captain William A. Jackson, a Bull descendant, was born in the house. And during that period, a number of outhouses and barns were built on the property. You could see them in the background there. And they were all still there, and they're all functional. After the last of the Bull descendants left the house during the 1960s, the officials in Orange County made a very wise choice. They knew how historic the property was, and so Orange County bought the house, the property, and everything. And because it was belonged to the county, they relocated a one-room schoolhouse, wooden schoolhouse, onto the property to enhance the thing. And that's where you start the tour. You basically start your tour in this one-room schoolhouse that's on the far side of the property, and then you move over and come into the house and see the house. It's open to visitors. It's a $3 admission for this whole experience, and you probably could spend a half day there easily. And it gives you visitors a very unique perspective of what life was like on a Hudson Valley farm during the 1830s, albeit a wealthy family farm. So, and also, this one is open May through October as well, but during the month of December, they open for candlelight tours. And they bring you through. It's kind of like the Mills Mansion opens. Here, they open for tours there on weekends, and they serve eggnog and things like that. Okay, we're going to come up the 9W corridor in Ulster County now. We're going to stop in Milton, which is a hamlet in the town of Marlborough, right across the river. And this I just found to be a very interesting story. First of all, the title of the chapter is The Fighting Quakers of Milton. And if you know anything about the pacifism of Quakers, you will very rarely, if ever, see fighting and Quakers in the same sentence. So I named the chapter, because I have to be different. Let me explain to you why. Given the pacifism embraced by members of the Religious Society of Friends, or Quakers, those words are rarely used together. But during the nation's Civil War, those words accurately describe the actions taken by 2 brothers who lived in Milton, and actually their cousin who came from Kingston, also a devout Quaker, when they actually joined the military, joined the Union Army, and took off arms. Edward and John Catcham grew up in Milton. They were very, very well educated and devout Quakers, but they had extremely strong feelings about the battle to abolish slavery in the country. They were encouraged to join the war by their cousin, Captain Nehemiah Halleck Mann, who was serving with the 120th Regiment out of Kingston, and he used to write to them frequently, encouraging them to join. The siblings originally wanted one of them to stay behind to work the mother's farm. The mother was a recent widow. And so Edward, being the older one, he was the first to join. And because of his education, he joined in July 1862 when he was made a second lieutenant. He eventually ended up at the Battle of Gettysburg. And according to documents, the fighting was fast and furious. And his commanding officer had just turned to him and said, "Listen, stay under cover as much as you can." Well, his exact quote to his officer was, "A dead man is better than a living coward." As he said the word coward, a bullet struck him in the forehead and killed him instantly. 5 months prior to that happening, his younger brother John was getting tired of being on the farm while his brother was at war, so he joined Company M of the 4th New York Cavalry out of Manhattan. Like his brother, he was made a second lieutenant. And after engaging in numerous battles down south, he was found to be too fatigued to continue to be a productive soldier. They sent him to Seminary Hospital in Washington, D.C., and now the story gets interesting. Their mother, Maria Catcham, got into a horse and buggy by herself in the middle of the war and rode down to Washington, D.C. to personally care for her surviving son. When he recovered, she rode back by herself to Milton, and he was attached to a unit that was stationed in Virginia, where unfortunately he and another 23 Union Army troops were captured by the Confederates. They were confined in a horrible, horrible prison. Libby Prison, there are documentaries about. If you go on a computer on YouTube, you can see documentaries. It's in Richmond, Virginia, and it's just riddled with disease. It was just a filthy place. And so based on his worn out, his fatigue to begin with, and the disease prevalent in the prison, John Catcham died while he was incarcerated here. When the war ended, Maria Catcham got back in a horse and carriage, went down and retrieved her 2 sons' bodies, brought them back up to Milton, and she buried them side by side. You know where Ship's Lantern Inn is? This cemetery, it's a very tiny cemetery, is the intersection just north of Ship Lantern Inn. You can't see it from the road. Don't try. I tried. I went right across the double yellow line and almost got, it wasn't good. But what you do is on the corner there's a cabinet maker, and you're allowed to do this. You go right behind the cabinet maker's small building and you'll see the car path to get up. It's a very small cemetery. And then right near the 2 brothers, John and Edward Catcham, right from where I'm taking this picture actually, it's right behind me, is their cousin who also died in the war, and that was Captain Nehemiah Halleck Mann. And his gravestone is distinctive because it has a Captain Stone hat on the top of it. Now, where I got a lot of the information for this chapter was through the historian for Marlborough, hooked me up with the last Halleck Mann descendant to be living in Milton. He's 88, well, he was 88 when I wrote the book, so he's about 90 now. And he lives right on the river, and he just pulled out. I spent the whole day at his house, and he had all the family documents and photographs and everything, really interesting. And he was also the last Quaker to live in Milton. And that's pretty unbelievable because, I don't know if you know this, but during the Underground Railroad, Milton was a huge stop on the Underground Railroad. They would get people, the Nine Partners Meeting House in Millbrook would send fugitive slaves across the Hudson River at night in rowboats. And then from Milton, they would get them up to the Finger Lakes, where there was another big Quaker, so that they can get into freedom. So he is the last one, and very interesting man. Okay, going to the highest point that I'm going to show you tonight on that side of the river is Kingston. The 4 corners at the intersection of Crown and John Street in Kingston have the distinction of being the only intersection in the United States to feature 4 18th century structures on each corner. This is better known, some people call it Upper Kingston, I call it the Stockade District. And that's, where this comes from. because Kingston was then the capital of New York at the time. It was a perfect target for the British when they broke through the chains and they got up the river and they went and burned down the city of Kingston in 1777. Just about every building sustained some sort of damage. They burned down many of them completely. And these four structures were quickly rebuilt after the British finally left. We're going to start with this house here. It's a 1.5-story, 9-room Franz Rogan house. He owned the house. It's on the northeast corner of the intersection. Following the attack, this part of the house was gone. From here out was an empty lot. And it just stood like that. Well, what they did was the local officials put gallows on that empty lot, and they were hanging British spies or British officers on that spot. Well, everyone else is trying to build their houses up, and Franz Rogan said, wait a minute, I'd like to repair my house. And believe it or not, even though he owned that land, they made him pay £7, 10 shillings to reclaim the property that his house originally occupied. Well, he got back at them. We all get back at them one way or another. He sent his sons out and he said, quick, before they come and dismantle the gallows, take them down. And to this day, the ceiling beams in this house are the original gallows that they hung. How's that? You're sitting in your living room and you look up and you go, wonder how many people swung from that. Interesting. This house also, there were a number of houses in the Stockade District. The Stockade District got its name because the governor of the colonies ordered the settlers to build a stockade fence around the whole district because they were worried about Native American attacks. And many of the houses have tunnels in them so that families could escape if the Native Americans attacked, and that's one of them. It goes about a quarter of a mile out and comes out in the woods, or what was the woods. It's been cemented up now for security reasons, but that is one of the houses that had that tunnel in it originally. The house across the street from this house here, belonged to Matthew Pearson, and it's on the southeast corner. And that was repaired immediately after the British left. It was used as a public house, or a tavern, if you will, and the family lived in the back of the tavern. In 1820, a Dr. John Goodwin bought the house, and he added a wing onto the side of the house and opened a pharmacy there. So you would go in the front door, you would go into his office, get medical treatment. He would give you a prescription. You would come out, go around the corner to go to the pharmacy, and he'd change his hat from a doctor to a pharmacist. It was one-stop shopping. He probably founded Walmart, but that was him. Now, across the street, this building here was built as the Kingston Academy. It was the first academy built in New York State, and it was a very, very prestigious school. It counts among its graduates future New York State Governor DeWitt Clinton graduated from this school. It later was used by a cabinet maker, and then it was used by the Kingston Daily Leader weekly newspaper. Getting across the street to that one, this is the oldest house of the four. This 2-story house was built in 1700. And this was the Matthew Jansen house at 43 Crown Street. After being rebuilt, it went through a series of owners, and one of those owners happened to be a delegate to the New York State Constitutional Convention. Later on, a dentist bought it. His family lived upstairs, and he had his office downstairs. And then a reporter for the Daily Freeman newspaper bought this house, which tells me I need to quit the Poughkeepsie Journal and go to the Daily Freeman because I'm not making enough money to buy this house. But that's another story too. This is a wonderful area, seriously. If you want to visit a really nice area, you can visit the Senate House. You can go, it's a very walkable community too. The old Dutch church is there, and that was visited by George Washington during the Revolution. On the grounds of the old Dutch church is a 7-ton monument to our first governor, George Clinton. He's buried there. And right across the street from the graveyard is the Ulster County Courthouse, where he took his oath of office as the first governor, and Sojourner Truth fought for the freedom of her son, who was illegally transferred to Alabama when slavery was abolished in New York State. You could spend the whole day there. A lot of nice restaurants, and now we're going to hop across the Rhinecliff-Kingston Bridge. No name change there, thank you very much. And we will go to what is now Germantown. In 1710, approximately 3,000 German Palatines got free passage on 10 British ships, and they came from England to the Hudson Valley, and they established 2 camps, one on the east side of the Hudson River, one on the west. They got free passage in return for promising that they would work to help support the Royal Navy. Well, the camp that they set up on the other side of the river, the town is still called West Camp, and it's right outside of Saugerties. On the east side of the river, they named it East Camp. They were very creative with the names, Well, anyway, East Camp, they settled, and within 2 years, they found out that they didn't have the wherewithal, they didn't have the material to support the Royal Navy, so the Parliament stopped giving them financial aid, and the Palatines scattered all over the Hudson Valley. In this area, many of them came to Rhinebeck and down in this area, and they became tenant farmers. Some of them actually farmed the land that is now the Vanderbilt Mansion. In those days, it was owned by Morgan, and he rented out parcels to them. And Poets Walk, if you're familiar with Poets Walk Park up in Rhinebeck, that's another chapter in the book, by the way. You'll see the stone walls where the Palatines separated their parts of the land that they had to farm on. Well, there was a group that stayed here, and actually 4 villages formed out of East Camp. In 1720, those people built the German Reformed Sanctity Church, and in 1746, they built this parsonage for the minister 2 blocks east of it. This is all but 2 blocks east off of 9G, and yet probably nobody knows it's there. The first resident pastor that lived there was Caspar Ludwig Schnorr. And in 1767, they added this eastern section onto the house, a little addition. It's very easy to tell the original structure from the addition because the original structure has 3-foot wide stone walls, and that was to keep the heat in and the cold out. The addition is a brick-filled wood structure. So I guess you don't want to be there in the wintertime. That was probably pretty cold. They eventually, in 1814, they built a new church farther inland, and they sold the parsonage to a physician. Well, several owners owned this house as a residence, but in 1944, Long Island residents Friedel and Edward Eckert purchased it, and they embarked on a lot of renovations. Originally, this was the front door to the house. They built this little stoop here and put the door up here and replaced it. So they, in effect, they made what was the first floor, they made it into the basement of the house. They put stucco on the front of the building, and they also put the, like I said, they shifted the door up and stuccoed the entire original section there. They poured a concrete basement. That's what I was looking for as well. Now, in the 1990s, the Eckerts donated the building to the town of Germantown, which is originated from those 4 little villages. It merged and became Germantown. The only person using this building today is the town historian. And this building is open all year round. This is not a May through, so if you have a nice sunny day coming up and you want to take a trip up there, it's open every Saturday from 9 to noon. You will make the historian's day. When I walked in, he was jumping all over the place. This building still has the original beams, built-in cabinets, a huge fireplace on the lower level, and it has an extensive exhibit of artifacts. There was a Dr. Linder, he's a professor at Bard College, an archaeologist. He did years-long dig around the property, and they found the faces of porcelain dolls, they found pewter silverware, they found china, and it's all on exhibit here. So it's like a museum, and you can go in there free of charge. I'm telling you, you'll make his day. He'll show you every item in the place. And like I said, many people don't even know it's there. I'm sure the people in, Germantown must know it's there, but it's only 2 blocks off of 9G, so it's not that far of a drive. So now we're going to come down to a site you may be familiar with, right here in Hyde Park. I'm sure, being the Historical Society, that everybody here knows that the original name of this municipality was Stoutenburg. This 1-acre family cemetery was established in 1768, and today it remains the last parcel of land owned by descendants of the first family to have settled in this town. It was originally known as Stoutenburg. I'm going to correct that statement. They also owned the William Stoutenburg house on 9G, just south of East Market Street at that intersection with Stewart's. They owned that property too. Born in New York City in 1696, Jacobus, thank you, Stoutenburg, man, you weren't there for the lecture. I was at her house. She shared a lot of the information that's in this chapter. I have news for you. He was the first person, the first white man to settle here. He built the house in 1741 in what is right in the middle of today's West Market Street, down by Park Place. Right across from the Wales House, if you will. You know where the Wales House is. And the house stood in the middle, and what is now West Market Street was originally his drive off of Albany Post Road or the King's Highway, whatever it was, to get to his house. He was a merchant, farmer, and a judge who acquired a massive amount of property in the region, and with his son-in-law, Major Richard de Cantillon, he built a dock along the river to expedite trade in the area. Unfortunately, in 1777, when the Brits were coming up the river to burn down the city of Kingston, they fired on and destroyed that landing. And the reason they did that was the Stoutenburgs were staunch patriots, and they had heard about them. Mr. and Mrs. Stoutenburg relocated temporarily for safety reasons to their son William's house on Violet Avenue, and then they came back home. In 1870, the Stoutenburg house on what is now West Market Street was in serious disrepair, and it was demolished. What was originally the driveway to the house was extended all the way down to the river, and they named it West Market Street. And that's how that came about. Let's see, the family cemetery sits at the north end of Dottie Avenue. See, I'm always getting in trouble. But you know what the beauty is? Watch what I do. It's my Brooklynese, I'm sorry. I heard you. Boy, these women are tough. I thought I survived. Anyway, Doty Avenue, it's at the end of it, and it's right on the border of the Vanderbilt mansion. Now, curiously, the original entrance to the cemetery used to be on the north side of the cemetery, and so people had to go onto the Vanderbilt estate to get into the cemetery, and Frederick Vanderbilt was not very happy about this. In fact, he tried to buy the cemetery at one point from the staff because he was fed up with people coming on his estate. Well, the family wasn't going to allow that, and what they did was they eventually made the entrance on the south side of the cemetery, and that solved that problem. In 1937, the descendants built a formal gate and wall around the grounds, and the grave of Jacobus Stoutenburg is located on the west rear section of the grounds. If you go in, it's right on the left there in the back of the grounds. He can also be seen, he's prominently featured in the third panel of the 19-panel artwork in the Hyde Park Post Office. You could see him in there working on the grounds and getting ready to build a house and everything there. So, do you know how we went from Stoutenburg to Hyde Park? This is a side note. Well, Dr. John Bard, who wanted St. James built, and his son eventually built it, Samuel, he lived on the property that is now the Vanderbilt estate, and he named the estate Hyde Park. He named it after the governor of the colony, Edward Hyde. Well, a fellow put up right on the corner of West Market Street, put up a tavern, and he liked the name of the estate, and much to Dr. Bard's chagrin, he named it the Hyde Park Tavern. And the doctor was not at all pleased. Well, in those days, you would have barbers working in a tavern. You would have, like Stissing House, which is another chapter in the book. You would have barbers, even doctors operating in a portion of the building. Well, the owner of the tavern wanted a post office. So he applied to the post office, and the post office looked at the name of his business, and it said Hyde Park Tavern, and they did no research and just named the town Hyde Park. So it went from Stoutenburg to Hyde Park. I worked for the post office for 38 years. I'm not surprised. Right, George? Okay, we're going to go to Poughkeepsie now. How am I doing here? And this is, you know what amazes me about hidden treasures? Some of them are right on main thoroughfares. This is located right on Main Street in the city of Poughkeepsie. It's a 1.5-story, 18th century Georgian-style red brick building on Main Street in the city. It was built in 1767 as the residence for the minister of the Poughkeepsie and Fishkill Churches of England. Now, the Church of England in Poughkeepsie is still in operation. It is now named Christ Church. It's on Montgomery Street in the city, but that was the church that he ministered to. The church that he ministered to in Fishkill is still called Trinity Church, but obviously it's not a Church of England today. Now, glebe is a Saxon word meaning an area of land which the proceeds support the parish and provide a home for its minister. In 1766, the Poughkeepsie and Fishkill churches joined forces to share a minister to save the costs. They hired Reverend John Beardsley, and he had a choice at that time of living in Fishkill or Poughkeepsie. He chose Poughkeepsie. So the congregations bought a 23-acre farm. This was, believe it or not, a 23-acre farm at that time. And they built this house for him and his family. By the way, Main Street in those days was called Finkeltown Road. And it went straight up 44 through Pleasant Valley and out to Washington Hollow. They added on some extra acreage for him to the original parcel. The home had 3 bedrooms, a parlor, a study room, and a keeping room. Anybody want to take a stab what a keeping room is? The keeping room was the room right off the kitchen, because the only fire that really kept going all the time was in the kitchen. And so the keeping room was always fairly warm during the winter, and on a real cold night upstairs, the family would come down and stay in the keeping room. See the things I learned doing this research? It's unbelievable. We never had a keeping room in Brooklyn. Oy. Okay. Everything was going well, and then the American Revolution started. Don't forget, Reverend Beardsley is a loyalist. He's with the Church of England. Well, at that point, the Committee of Safety in Poughkeepsie confined the Reverend and his family in the glebe house. They were not allowed to leave. Services at both churches were terminated for the duration of the war. And he can only leave the house to christen a new baby or an anoint a dying person. On December 5th, 1977, the Council of Safety ordered Beardsley and his entire family to leave and go to New York City, where the British controlled New York City at that time. And he did so with only what they could carry in the wagon, and that was it. They took their clothes and they left, and he became a chaplain for a British regiment. When he moved out, the building went through various purposes. From 1780 to 1785, the quartermaster officers of the Continental Army operated out of this house. In 1792, the two congregations decided they didn't need this house anymore, and so they sold it, and then it went into private hands. The last two owners who owned this house ran a florist shop out of the house, and they had a big greenhouse in the backyard. When the second owner, the last owner who was running a florist house, made it known that she planned to knock down the building and put up a larger greenhouse and just operate the store out of the greenhouse, bless you. The city of Poughkeepsie and the Dutchess County Historical Society stepped in and said, no way, you're not knocking this house down, it's too historic. And so they basically saved the house, and in 1929, it became a city-owned property. Today, it remains a city-owned property, but it's under the auspices of the Mid-Hudson Heritage Center, and they own 4 buildings on Main Street. They own the old trolley barn. You know, we used to have the trolleys between Wappingers and Poughkeepsie, and this barn is where they held all the trolleys at night, because they didn't run through the night. And they have dances and things of that nature in there. They own another building where they have an art and ceramic operation. So since taking this over, they now have lectures here on Friday nights. They have special events related to history in here, and they give free tours of the house, and their contact information is also at the end of this chapter. And let me see if I could squeeze one more in, and then I'll take some questions. We'll go down to Fishkill, New York. And this is right at the intersection of 82 and 52, where it splits. And this is known as the Derek Brinkerhoff Mansion. It's perched atop a bluff on the north side of routes 82 and 52, where they split 2 miles east of the village of Fishkill. It had its beginnings in 1718, and that year Dirk Brinkerhoff purchased 200 acres, and shortly after, his son Abraham built 2 stone rooms. This started just as 2 stone rooms, and I'll show you where they were in a minute. Just prior to the Revolutionary War, Abraham's son Derek enlarged the home to what you see today, and he erected the mansion around the original 2 rooms, which sat right here. These were the 2 first rooms in the house, and then he expanded the whole thing. Now, the location of the Brinkerhoff house was an ideal stopping place during the Revolutionary War. In January 1777, while traveling to Philadelphia, John Adams spent one night here with the Brinkerhoffs. In March of 1778, the home was the headquarters for Continental Army General Alexander McDougall, and while he was there, among the visitors who visited him were New York Governor George Clinton, John Jay, General Henry Knox, and Benedict Arnold. Now, if I was giving this to a younger crowd, I would try to convince them that the music for the Broadway musical Hamilton was done here, but I won't try that with you. They get very impressed with stuff like that. General George Washington stayed at this house for a week from October 1st to the 8th in 1778, and he was accompanied by Alexander Hamilton. French General Lafayette stayed at the house during part of Washington's stay, and then when he was on his way back 3 weeks later, he stopped by the house, but he felt very, very ill. And he was confined to this house for 1 month. In fact, George Washington sent his personal physician from Newburgh to take care of him. Well, when Lafayette returned in 1824, I guess you can call it a victory tour, the war was over and everything, the hospitality of the Brinkerhoff family wasn't lost on him, and he presented them with this beautiful French period bureau in gratitude for their hospitality. During the 19th century, Matthew Brinkerhoff covered the stone exterior with wood siding, replaced the original fireplace mantels with marble ones, and added bedrooms onto the third floor of the mansion. In 2014, the 10,000 square foot mansion was finally sold out of the family by Mary Brinkerhoff, and she actually had all the furnishings and everything auctioned off, much to the chagrin of the rest of the family. It was a whole big scandal thing going on. But one of the nice things that happened with this bureau is two people from the Fishkill Historical Society that I'm very friendly with went to the auction. They heard about it, and they wanted to salvage this Lafayette desk. They felt it belonged in Fishkill. They were told by the auctioneer to please sit on their hands and not bid on it and trust him. And it ended up that someone on a phone in Virginia bought it. It was a Brinkerhoff family member that was furious that this was all being auctioned, and he donated it to the Fishkill Historical Society. And it now sits in this house here on the corner of Route 84 and Route 9. It's on the east side of the road, the Van Wyck Homestead, which the Fishkill Historical Society owns. So that's the sites I have. I know I was short of 55, but I did the best I could do. Are there any questions? This is the shy period. This is, yeah, that's fine. We can, yes.
Please, wait a minute.
It's like the Phil Donahue.
Sorry.
It's like the Phil Donahue song. Go ahead.
I heard that the Brinkerhoff house is now a B&B.
It is now a bed and breakfast. And I will say this, when I went up to take a photo of it and everything, the owner of it is very, very friendly. He left the entire interior historically, you know, integrity is in place. And he found a lot of things up on the third floor that belonged to the family that were just left, and he framed them, and they're all hanging. So he's really doing the right thing by it. Like I said, I got to talk to him when I went up there, took the picture and everything, and I thought how cool it would be to maybe stay in the room that Lafayette was in for a month, you know? And then he told me the rates, $400 a night. $400 a night.
No wonder he was sick.
I'll wave to the window. Yeah, could you imagine the bill he got when he left? Any other questions? No questions? I couldn't have done that good. Or did I wear you out? Here's a question.
I would like to say just one thing.
As you know, Jacobus left an acre of land for his cemetery,
Yes.
and he wanted his children to, of course, die and be placed there. But he also said in his will that he wanted his slave to be buried within the walls.
Yes.
And a few years ago, the Family Association put a gravestone in the cemetery in honor of that slave. There is no name on it, but it just says Jacobus' slave, and I think that's very nice.
I saw it on their website, yeah.
Oh, you did see that?
That was
Okay.
terrific. Yeah, I look at their website all the time, ever since I spoke to them. They have an annual meeting, it's once a year, right? Yeah. In October, they meet once a year, and they had me do a presentation on the family at one of them, and they're very nice people, and they have the Stoutenburg Teller Association website, and you could read up on the family and everything. Another question. Herb's got one. This is pretty good. You're going to hear the voice but not see Herb because he's behind the camera. We're on TV.
Shortly. I found it interesting when you were talking about that house in Germantown that they later dug up all of these artifacts.
Yes.
What did these people do? Just throw them out the window or something?
Well, royal carting wasn't around as far as I could determine. And so they probably buried their trash. What would you do with it? What would you do with it? They weren't contaminating the Hudson in those days either.
Yeah, true.
They were a little more environmentally, yeah, they probably just buried their trash. What's that? Yeah, yeah. But that ended up in the ground, you know, and then the outhouses went away. There's a question here in the back. And then the outhouses went away, and there's the items left down there.
Okay, what people used to do with their garbage, which my grandfather had a farm on Falk Hill Road, and there would be a pile out on the side of the field where you would go and throw your broken china and things like that. And therefore, you got rid of your breakable things and burnt your other stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, my son-in-law and daughter like to hike the trail that goes from Valkill out to the Hyde Park Drive-In, the farm trail. And one day they were coming through there, and he ventured off. My son-in-law's an adventurer, and he ventured off the trail a little bit, and he found all the really vintage alcohol bottles. You know, and now they're in his garage, which is his man cave. It must have, yeah, because they were all stacked up, you know. So, well, I do have all 3 volumes, Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3. They're $17 each. I'd be happy to sign them for you. But most of all, thank you for a great turnout on a rainy night.